Hello there, it's me Alex back with yet another video, and today I'm very excited to show you about something I've been working on. It's an easy way to parse strings in C#. It's a program I call abparser. In this video we'll go straight into how to download abparser and use it. It's actually really simple once you get used to it. So then, if you're ready to find out the AB World way of parsing strings, this is how. Right then, no messing around or anything, let's get straight into it. So then, first of all, we're going to download abparser. Now, downloading abparser is really easy. All you need to do is go over into your project, right click on it, and click on Manage New Git Packages. You'll get this screen. Now, make sure Browse is selected and type abparse. Then you'll see it there. Just click on it and hit install. Alright, now that it's installed, let's take a look at how abparser works and how you can use it. Right, in abparser there are 3 key terms which I will use heavily in this video, so make sure you remember these. The first one is a token. A token is just a group of characters abparser will recognize. Every time it comes across one, it will notify you. Take a look at the JSON at the bottom. In bold we have all the tokens. Every time abparser comes across one of these characters which you've told abparser is a token, it will notify you. Right, now telling it to tell you when it reaches certain characters or groups of characters is great, but how do we get the stuff that isn't a token? This is where our other 2 keywords come in, leading and trailing. Take a look at the text at the bottom. Let's say the dot and comma are tokens. The leading gets the text between the previous token and the token we're on. So let's put the actual token in yellow and the leading in red. Now, if you take a look, there's a lot of red before the first dot, which is a token. That's the leading for the dot, because it gets the text between the last token and the dot. Now, in this case, because there is no token before it, it gets the text between the start and the dot. If you're still confused, don't worry. When we actually get to the code, it might make more sense. But now you may be wondering, if it's between the previous token and the current token, then why is it also after the dot? Well, that's just because that's just the leading for the comma. And as you can see, the leading for the comma goes from the previous token, which is the dot, up to the comma. Now, just so that you don't get confused, let's go to a simpler piece of text here. This piece of text only has one token, the dot. So let's go ahead and colour it. The leading is red and the actual token is yellow. Now, hopefully you can see that all the leading is literally the text leading up to the token. So now, there's one more keyword, the trailing. I'm going to colour the trailing in green, and hopefully now you may be able to see what it is. The trailing is just the opposite of the leading. It's the text from the dot to the next token, which in this case doesn't exist, so it just goes up to the end. Alright, one more example now. Let's go back to a more complex string with the dots and commas being tokens, and instead of colouring it, just so that we're all on the same page, let's just write the leading and trailing for each token. For the first dot, the leading is hello and the trailing well. Remember, the leading is leading up to it and the trailing is trailing away from it. Alright, onto the comma now. Now you'll notice that the leading is the same as the trailing of the last token, which was a dot. That's actually because, if you look in this section here, you can see that they both share the same piece of text here. And of course, the trailing of the comma is long. Alright then, let's just look at that last token. This token has the leading of long as well, since it's sharing the same piece of text here. And for the trailing, it's just example. And of course, there is no token after it, so it just goes to the end. Right then, finally, let's jump right into Visual Studio. So, to begin, let's actually make our own abparser, and let's just call it Demo Parser. Now, to make a parser, all you need to do is make a class, and make it inherit abparser, making sure you have the right namespace, of course. And there you go, we now have an abparser, but it doesn't actually do anything. So the first thing we need to do is add some tokens. Now to do this, just go into the constructor and set the tokens variable. It has to be an observable collection because of how abparser works. Right, so this is where we define all our tokens. We're going to use our dot and comma example for this. So, when creating a token, there are two things that we need to set. The actual characters that make up the token and the name. Now, you can have duplicate names if you want. In fact, abparser doesn't even use the names, they're just for you to identify tokens. So we'll go ahead and give it the name of dot. Now we also need to actually give it the characters which make up the token. That's just the name so that we can identify it. Now a token doesn't have to be multiple characters long, so we'll just go ahead and put a dot in there. Now, here's a performance tip. It's best to use a character array like this, rather than a string. And the reason is that in the background, abparser actually does everything on character arrays. In fact, that's actually what makes it so fast. So it's best to just define the token as a character array, so that it doesn't have to convert the string over. Alright, let's now add the comma token over. Great, now we've got an abparser. However, it will run a method every time it comes across a token, and we need to override that so that we can actually do something. So, let's go and override it. It's called onTokenProcess, surprisingly. As you can probably tell by the name, every time it comes across a token, it will go here. Now, this is where all of the logic for the parser goes. There's also one other called beforeTokenProcess. However, that one is designed only to set a token limit, and I'll get into that later. But what I want to point out is that all of the main logic of the parser should really go into the onTokenProcess, since that's where we can get the leading and trailing. Alright then, let's actually put in some logic. Now, I'm running a simple console application here, so all I'm going to do is just make it print out on the screen the leading and trailing. To get the leading and trailing, you'll need to look inside the E parameter. Now, I'm also going to print the token name with a colon after it so that we can clearly see what's going on here. Great, we've gone ahead and made an abparser, given it 2 tokens, and we're printing out the leading and trailing of each token. So now, let's run it. For this, I'm going to go into my entry point here and create an instance of demo parser. Then I'll just use the public start method that's on all abparsers to start it. This takes in the string that you want to parse. And now, if we run the application, we'll see our result. We went to the dot and got the leading, and then the trailing, and then we went to the comma and got the leading and trailing. And of course, as you can see, the trailing of the dot and the leading of the comma are the same, of course. Now, if you're confused in any way, let's just explain what's happening here in a more in-depth explanation. The parser goes through the string and comes across its first token and gets the leading. The leading is just from the last token to it, but there isn't one, so it just goes from the start. Then we also see that there's text after, so we go ahead and get that up to the next token. This is the trailing of our current token. Then we go along and land on the next token. Now, the leading for this token is from the dot to the comma, which is the same as the trailing of the dot, which is what is happening here. Then it gets the trailing of the comma, which is between the comma and the next token, but there isn't a next token, so it just goes to the end of the string. And now we've gone ahead and made a very basic parser. But of course, there are a few other features you'll want. Let's go ahead and change our example here. Let's say that any dots and commas in quotes are not counted as tokens. Now this is used everywhere. It's used in JSON, in XML, in all sorts of places. So how would we implement this? You may just think, oh well, just put a bit of logic saying, if we're in quotes, then don't respond to any token. However, there's a problem with that. The leading of the last quote would be wrong. It would be starting at something that wasn't even meant to be a token in the first place. This is where the token limit comes in. The token limit does what it says. It limits the parser to only focus on a certain token. This now means that the trailing of the first quote and the leading of the second quote will actually be the contents of the quotes. If you're still confused, don't worry. Let's jump over to the code and hopefully it will make more sense. Now, in most parsers you would usually store a variable saying whether you're within a string or not. So let's create a boolean and call it inString. This will represent whether we're within a string, and I'll go ahead and add a string token here. As soon as we enter the first quote, in fact, even before abparser creates the trailing for the first quote, we want to set a limit, and we have to do that in the before token process method. So let's go ahead and override the before token process method. Now, like I said earlier, this method is designed to allow you to set the token limit. And the reason you have to use this method to set the token limit is because this method actually runs before it creates the trailing. And if we set this within the onTokenProcess method, the trailing for this quote and leading for the next quote wouldn't follow the limit. So basically, always set the token limit within the before token process method. Right then, now, in here, we'll just want to say that if it's a string, we'll want to change the token. And of course, as you can see here, I'm using the name to identify. Now then, let's go ahead and set the token limit. To do that, just set the value of the token limit variable to a new observable collection, since once again, that's how abparser works in the background. Right, now it's actually an array of character arrays. So, since the characters that make up a token is a character array, let's go ahead and pass that in. If we look inside the parameter token, you'll see that there's a property called token. This contains the characters that make up the current token that's fired the method. So we'll go ahead and use that. And now this entire line of code says that it will only look for the same token as we have now. But there's just one thing we're missing. When it gets to the end quote, we don't want it to continue with the token limit. We want it to automatically clear out the token limit before we create the trailing of the next quote. Now, we could do that manually and just clear out the token limit next time we come in here, but there is actually already something built in to do that for us. Just set the limit affects next trailing to false. Now, as you may be able to tell by the name, if this is false, before it builds the trailing of the next token, which will be a quote in this case, it will clear out the token limit. This essentially means that only the contents of the quotes will follow the limit. Alright, don't forget that we only want to do this if we aren't already in a string. Alright, now we also want to set the inString variable to the correct values. Now, don't forget what I said earlier about putting all of the main logic into the onTokenProcess method. So, in here, we'll say that if we aren't already in a string, and the token is a string, we want to make it so that we are. But also, we want to say that we aren't in a string anymore if we were already in one. Notice that I'm not actually checking whether it's a string token or not. That's because of the limit, it has to be a string token. It can't be anything else if it's already in a string. Now, we're going to use the same dot and comma example, but with quotes around the dot. Because of the limit, the dot will be ignored because it's inside quotes. So, let's take a look at the result. Here it is. Right then, if you're confused in any way about what we did, let's go through what's happening step by step. First of all, we have our string, which we need to parse, and we have our token limit, as well as our inString variable. Now, what happens is abparser will go through the string and immediately come across a string token. So, this is why the leading for the first quote is empty. It's because there's nothing before the first quote. Now, as soon as we come across the quote, the before token process kicks in and we set a token limit so that abparser will only focus on string tokens. All other tokens will get ignored. Now, because we did this in the before token process, which runs before it creates the trailing will also be affected by the token. So now we go ahead and build the trailing, and we ignore the dot because of the limit. And now we've got the trailing for the string token. So we go ahead and execute the onToken process. This now makes inString become true. Then we go ahead and hit before token processed again, but for the last quote this time. And because we told abparser to automatically clear out the token limit before creating the trailing of the next token, it goes ahead and automatically removes the token limit. And now the leading of this quote is following the token limit. However, the trailing won't. So we go ahead and build the trailing. Now, because we don't have a token limit anymore, we went ahead and stopped at the comma. So now the trailing is in between the last quote and the comma. And of course, there's nothing there, so the leading of the comma and the trailing of the quote will both be empty. And then it goes ahead and gets the trailing for the comma. And that is exactly what just happened. If you were confused by that, then I'm afraid you'll have to rewatch the last few minutes a few times until it clicks in your head. And now, we're almost done. Hopefully now you have a basic grasp of how you could create a parser with this, but if you're not entirely sure where you would start when building a parser with it, very soon I'm going to release a demo video where I create a basic JSON parser with abparser. It's actually really easy once you grasp the concepts I've gone over in this video. Right, there's two more features I want to show you. The next one is not checking whitespace. Now, this one is actually a performance. Of course, in the source code of abparser actually checks to see if each character is a token or part of a token. However, by default, there is one thing it does that you should be aware of. When it comes across whitespace, it doesn't check to see if it's a token and just throws it into the current leading or trailing. And of course, this is actually a performance thing and makes it much faster when enabled. However, if any of your tokens contain whitespace, you'll want to disable this. To disable it, simply set the ignore whitespace variable to false. Great, there's just one more feature I want to show you now, and really, it's in almost every format out there. Escaping. Escaping is usually where you have a backslash before a token, which usually says, don't treat this as a token. Now, in abparser, by default, this is actually switched on. There are two variables within your abparser. The first one is a simple boolean called escape tokens, and if this is true, it will use the escape character to escape a token. If you want to turn off the escaping, simply set the escape tokens to false. And if you want to change the character that you have to put before a token to escape it, just set escape character, which by default is actually a backslash. So, I'll just go ahead and leave it on the default settings to show. If I go ahead and get rid of the quotes, and if I get rid of all the quotes here and just escape the first dot, you'll see that it doesn't get counted as a token, which is the default behavior of abparser when it comes to escaping. Also, just on another note, if you override the onCharacterProcessed method and you set the notifyCharacterProcessed variable to true, it will actually run this method every time it processes a character. However, that makes the parser insanely slow, so only do it if you really have. And that's it. That is the full abparser. Now, once again, if you think it would be difficult to make a full parser with this, take a look at my abparser JSON demonstration, which will be coming soon, where I actually make a simple JSON parser that supports escaping and everything abparser has to offer. And of course, thank you so much for watching this. It took ages to make with all the animations and everything, so I hope it was worth watching. Oh, and by the way, there were actually subtitles, which nobody ever really knows about, but those take ages as well. Above the arrows, you'll find the JSON documentation, if it's out, as well as my latest video. So, thank you for watching, I hope it was worth watching, and I hope I'll see you again sometime soon.